Welcome back, everyone, to Furthering Christendom. I am your co-host, as always, Mike DeVito, here with Dr. Tyler McNabb. And we have another special guest today. It seems to be something we've been doing a lot of, having great philosophers on the show. And so we have Dr. Tim Pawl. Dr. Tim Pawl is a professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, and has written two fantastic books in defense of Conciliar Christology and in defense of extended Conciliar Christology, both with Oxford University Press. And just incredible must-have resources for anybody studying philosophical theology or philosophy or theology in general. I mean, they're just great. Dr. Pawl has a number of other essays and articles that he's published. And so it's really a privilege and an honor to have you here, Dr. Pawl. Thank you so much. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks a bunch for having me on. It's nice to meet you guys. Well, Tyler, I've known for a long time via internet, but nice to see both your faces.
Indeed, you as well. So I'll kick things off, if you don't mind. What's the sort of fundamental issue, the fundamental philosophical issue in Christology, and how do you resolve this issue?
Yeah, well, you're starting easy, I see. Thank you. Yeah, no, the fundamental issue goes like this, I think. Jesus Christ is supposed to be both truly God and truly man. God in the exact same way that the Father and the Holy Spirit are God, and man in the exact same way that you and me are men. And the immediate philosophical quandary here is, how is that even possible? How do you get one thing that's both God in the same way the Father is, and man like me or you? If it's God, the argument goes, he's got to be, insert all the fantastic properties of the divine. Omniscient, omnipotent, necessary, all there. He's got to have all that business if he's really God. And if he's a man like you or me, he's supposed to be weak in some ways and not smart in some ways and contingent like you and I are. And nothing can be both omnipotent and weak in some ways, or omniscient and not smart in some ways, or necessary and contingent. Just take your pick. There's a whole row of divine features, a whole row of human features, and it seems like they match up such that they're contradictory to one another. So what are you going to do is the main philosophical objection to Christianity, or at least to this orthodox version of Christianity. Now, my response, in the books, I go through a bunch of different responses you can give. I think in the first book, I'm not sure the number, 20 maybe 17 different responses you could give to that initial problem I just raised. And my preferred response is something like this. Take a test case, like immutable. Christ is supposed to be immutable according to the ecumenical councils, those early gatherings of bishops. And he's mutable clearly because he changed. He went from being born to being hungry in the desert, to being scourged, to dying on a cross, to being resurrected. So clearly changes, allegedly unchanging. How do you fit those two together? And I think the best way to do it isn't to give up on either feature, like some of the thinkers do. Well, maybe he's not really divine. Or maybe he's divine, but he doesn't have the special fancy properties the Father has. Or to give up on his humanity and say he only appeared to be human. He wasn't really human. He didn't really suffer. I think the way to do it is to accept the full-throated explication of the councils, that he's both, and then try to figure out how that can be. And in my preferred view, the way you do it is like this. You ask, what does the world have to look like for something to be immutable? What sort of features does it have to have? And likewise for mutable too. And then I think what you should say is, to be immutable is to have a nature that is unable to change, like the Father's nature, like the one divine substance or nature. And to be mutable is to have a nature that's able to change, like you. Suppose you're a flesh and blood composite, like say Aquinas thought, of body and soul. That nature can change. And so Christ and only Christ fulfills both those conditions. He's the only thing we know of that has a divine nature unable to change and a human nature able to change. And so he's the only thing that counts as being both fully immutable like the Father and fully mutable like me or you. And what we said for that one toy case, we of course can extrapolate to all the other cases. So that's my preferred view. It sits nicely with the ecumenical councils and what they say. It's got no counterexamples of which I'm aware. I've looked for quite some time. So that's the view I like best.
All right, so we sort of look at these properties these, call them, I don't know, godlike properties or God properties,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we say that that a substance can be said to rightly possess this property if and only if it possesses a nature such that it's sort of like in line with that property. So if we're talking about omniscience, or I don't know, let's take something perhaps less controversial, simplicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that in his divine nature he's simple, so we can say that metaphysically Jesus is simple, but because he possesses a nature such that's simple, but his other nature, obviously his human nature, is not. It's complex. It's a composite. So
That's right.
we can say that Jesus is both simple and complex, right? Insofar as he has natures that sort of ground the truth of that property. Is that
Yeah,
a fair assessment?
that's what I
Okay.
think. Yeah, and John of Damascus and Thomas Aquinas would both say that Christ is both simple and complex. They
Yeah.
say it explicitly. So if you want to say with the tradition, you have to figure out, well, what did they mean? Even if you don't want to accept as true what they meant, like how could you say that and not be dumb? And I think the way they say that and not be dumb is they have a way of understanding simplicity and complexity, where it's just not obviously, odiously contradictory at the very beginning.
Right.
Like
Very
how
good.
dumb would you have to be if you thought you could say God is simple and complex and there's no problems there? Like if you thought you could say that and no big deal, carry on, and you and I could look at it and immediately think, oh, there's a trick there, something's going on, they'd have to be really foolish not to catch that. I think the best way to read them is thinking they have their own understanding of these terms, and their understanding of the terms doesn't lead to the awful, immediate, odious contradiction that you or I see with our understanding of the terms.
Yeah, I found that interesting. So like in my own faith journey, coming to understand that like words actually mean stuff, right? Like words have meaning. And it was, I was very quick in sort of my evangelical days just to take a word, say immutability or simplicity,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of redefine it, right? But the idea is like, no, actually, if we're gonna use these words, we need to go back and understand the fathers and how they use those terms, and not sort of interpret these words anachronistically. So I
Yeah,
think that's very helpful.
that's what you got to do.
So what's the best objection to your view? What's the
Mm-hmm.
best objection to your view, and how would you respond to that objection?
Yeah, there's a couple that I've seen. You asked for the best. Maybe I'll
The best.
present the best. All right.
Huge.
I like, it's weird to say you like it if it's an objection to your view, but I think the most forceful objection you find in my view, at least now that I know of, is from J.C. Beall. He says that I'm changing the subject. And so he thinks that what we should be asking, in his way of saying it, is we should be asking if Christ is mutable or immutable or both or neither. And what Tim Pawl is doing is he's talking not about immutability, but you might call it immutability star, where immutability is unable to change no matter what period. That's immutability, according to Beall. And then you have like has a nature that can't change. And that's like the derivative, uninteresting immutability star. And Paul sneakily, says Beall, Paul sneakily takes, says he's talking about the full-fledged immutability and is really giving us the light beer version of it. He's really giving us immutability star. So that's the objection. And my response is, nuh-uh. No, I'm not. I'm still talking about the good old-fashioned immutability. And here's why. So in my view, you can take an analogy like this. You can think of the word grasps. So the hand grasps and Tim grasps. And we can say those both of what's going on right around here. The hand grasps and Tim grasps. Now, you might want to say Tim, the person, grasps in virtue of what the hand is doing. Maybe. You might want to say that grasps is primarily said of the whole substance, and then only derivatively of the means by which you do it. Like thinking is said of the whole Tim, but there's a sense in which we can say it of my intellect as well. But primarily it's Tim that thinks, not the intellect that thinks. Now, both those they went in different directions. You might think that it's primarily a feature of the hand that it grasps, and then of the man derivatively. You might think it's primarily a feature of the man that he intellects, and then the mind derivatively. It can go either way. And so the claim that you're changing to a weaker version of a feature, if you focus on has a nature that, I think it's just not true. It can go either way. It could be that what the nature does can be primary. It could be what the person does is primary. And how do you tell which way it goes? Well, you look at what the speaker says. And those speakers, those ecumenical council guys, were talking about how the person, one and the same person, is passible and impassible and immutable and immutable. And so I think it's just not right to say I'm switching out the features. I think what I call, or what he calls, immutability star is really the feature they had in mind the whole time. And this unable to change no matter what period version just can't be what they had in mind. If they say in the very next sentence, as they do in the Nicene Creed, he suffered, died, and was buried, like it can't be the case that they thought he was unchangeable no matter what period, darn it. And he was also suffered, died, and was buried. Now, Beall's got a response, and he's super sharp. Beall wants to say, well, actually, you can have some contradictions that are true. And so it's really true that Christ suffered, or better, that he's immutable. And it's really false that Christ is immutable. And it's the very same proposition that has both the truth value true and the truth value false. So he's a very sharp dude. He's got it worked out. But that's his objection, and then my response to his objection.
Yes, so it kind of hits on the comment that we just made previously, right? Which is understanding the people who actually use the phrase. And so
yeah,
actually, on your view, it's kind of the other way around, right? He's talking about immutability star, and you're talking about immutability, at least insofar as the context of the fathers and those who followed the doctors of the church and so forth.
Yeah, that's my view.
Any quick comments on Beall's contradiction approach? I know you responded to him at length in a recent issue, Journal Analytic Theology. How would you respond to him, I guess, in a few minutes?
Yeah. Well, I think of it like this. Beall is one of the smartest logicians I know. He's got it figured out, and he knows how not to get himself in a pickle on the logic side of the equation. So in my response to him, the written response in Journal for Analytic Theology that you mentioned, I'm not going after the logic, because he can logic circles around me. And I'm pretty good at logic, but he's just really, really good at logic. So that's not what I'm going for. Instead, what I try to show is this. I argue that you give him the logic he wants. On my way of saying it, he takes logic and truncates it. He takes out some of the important inference rules. He doesn't say it like that, right? He says he starts with the right logic, and then people like me add in extraneous stuff. That's how he views it. But we both agree that there are some rules in my logic that aren't in his, like modus ponens. And so what I try to do is I say, assume for argument's sake that Beall's got logic right. Start with that smaller set of rules. I still think he's got a problem. And the problems go like this. With that smaller set of logic, and with what the church says, or what the early councils say, you still get claims like Jesus Christ is a human, and biology is supposed to tell us things like, I think biology tries to tell us things that all humans are changeable, or all humans have an organ, or all humans have circulatory systems, or take your pick of some biological fact. Well, if you had that claim, Jesus Christ is a human, and you let him have the claim that Jesus Christ is immutable, and that's, mutable is really the contradictory of immutable. Immutable is really the contradictory of mutable. Then you have a non-changing person. You have a human person with a non-changing circulatory system, or with no circulatory system, because he's also immaterial. And it's tricky to see how you can have a human without a circulatory system, and that not getting into trouble somewhere with biology. So that's one sort of response.
Yeah, very interesting.
A second is if you're standing next to Christ and his blessed hand is pierced with a nail, you're at Calvary with him. What's it look like on a J.C. Beall sort of approach? The blessed hand was pierced by a nail. That's true. It's also false, because nothing immaterial can be pierced by a nail. So if you're looking down, say, at where it's happening, what's the thing you're seeing there? I have no idea how to adjudicate what I'm seeing. I'm seeing something not get pierced. And I see that right now, like this coffee mug's not getting pierced. I know what not being pierced looks like, at least in some cases. And I'm also seeing something pierced, and I don't know how to fit those two perceptual features together. And that's just one little thing, right? It splits out through his whole life, where he is both suffering and not suffering, and both truthfully.
not that it would get much move the conversation forward or anything, but I suppose you could always just have a strong seeming about the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah.
But
Right.
suppose that's would be my intuitions. But I'll go ahead now and pass the ball to Mike, and he can
Sure.
ask the next question.
I feel so much more comfortable with football analogies. Can you tell I'm the only one that's not the professional academic? Like, I need to get a tie and a nice beard and but like I look so off compared to you guys.
Oh, we're just dorky looking, man. We're just dorky looking.
Yeah, the symposium that you guys did in the Journal of Analytic Theology was fantastic. And so I wasn't going to ask you, but I do want to ask, and it's kind of based on my own research, but what you think in general, not specific to Beall's Incarnation, but just the dialectic approach in general. Do you feel like that's kind of moving the goalposts a little bit when you start, like you said, truncating the formal logic to fit that dialectic system, or do you think that's a legitimate way to go? And that's honestly just an honest question, because I'm thinking of maybe making some kind of argument like that for my own work.
Yeah, well, so I am unmoved by true contradictions. If I moved at all, it's to total incomprehension. I don't get it. Not through lack of trying, and not through lack of dear friends like JC trying to convince me or show me why it's true. But for the life of me, if I've got P and I've got P then Q, then I think I can get Q. And it doesn't matter at all to me what P is or what Q is. I don't have to be in a certain system to do it. Sure looks like for all the world, Q follows from that, no matter what the content of P and Q are. Now, those folks like J.C. Beall, they put good pressure on me when they give me things like the liar's paradox, because it's tricky to figure out what to do with propositions like that, or to be less robust with it. Things that appear to be propositions like that, maybe they aren't. That's one response to it. But so on the one hand, I've got this, I just can't get away from thinking disjunctive syllogism is a valid inference form. I'm just stuck. Psychologically speaking, this isn't an argument. This is just maybe a liability of mine. I'm stuck with modus ponens and it's not going away. On the other hand, I've got these objections they offer. Well, what are you going to do with the liar paradox? And I think, not quite sure yet. I'm not going to do what you're doing because I can't figure it. I just can't do it. But not quite sure what I should do. So that's where I think the dialectic is, at least for me. With respect
The seemings are too strong.
Yeah, I can't get over it. I don't know. This is a hand. I can't get. I mean, there it is. I don't
Very
know.
Plantagean move of you, which I fully endorse. So.
Well, he taught me a couple classes. Maybe that's why it's in the blood.
Very good. Very good.
Oh, that's cool. You said Plantagean taught you a couple classes? Yeah.
I was a student at St. Louis University, but I did a year of study at Notre Dame, and I was his research assistant for that year.
Oh,
and he taught a couple classes that I took. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah. He's a wonderful human being. Yeah.
The best. One other question before we let you go, Dr. Pawl.
Sure.
At the end of your, I think it's the last chapter in your book, in defense of extended conciliar Christology, you argue that Christ, via his human nature, the incarnation via his human nature, has a form of omniscience. And so I was wondering if you could maybe explain what you mean there. And then I was also curious about how that relates to the problem of divine foreknowledge and human freedom.
Sure.
If you have a timeless God, your solution to that problem is going to be different than if your God is temporal. And so now it seems like you could have a timeless God and a solution for him, and Christ as in time, and you'd have to have a different solution for him. So maybe you could speak on that a little.
Yeah, for sure. So the way in which Christ's human intellect has extra knowledge beyond our knowledge is for Aquinas, and Aquinas says for everybody. And it's disputed questions on truth. He says everybody thinks this, and the thing that everybody thinks is that Christ, in his human intellect, knew all things past, present, and future. So it's not omniscience like knows everything, even open to God's power that God doesn't do but could do. It's that anything that will happen or has happened or is happening is something that Christ in his human intellect knows. And that's enough to be surprising right there. Like he knew 2,000 years ago, we'd be having this conversation. He knew I'd be wearing this bow tie. I mean, he knew all this stuff. He knew how to conjugate different languages he had never heard of in his human nature. So that's a lot to take in. Why think that? Well, Aquinas, and Augustine, and Gregory the Great, and all sorts of big names thought it. And they thought it for a couple of reasons. Some of them scriptural. I should have looked this up before I came on here. But somewhere in Scripture, it says, in Christ dwelt the fullness of truth and wisdom, or something like this. And they look at that and they say, well, you'd be lacking some truth and wisdom if you didn't know, this or that. So there's some scriptural reasons they give for why they think it. There's some perfect being theology they would give for why they think it. There's some reasons based on his mission. Like, it's important for Christ to know what he's sitting in judgment of. But to know what he's sitting in judgment of, he has to know our sins. And so it's important for him to have known the sins. Anyway, those are the sorts of reasons they give. In the book, I don't so much argue for the view as try to show that view, that Christ, in virtue of his human intellect, knew all things past, present, and future. I try to show that view, together with the conciliar texts, doesn't itself provide a contradiction. So it's a defensive move. And you're right. One place to push here is, okay, suppose for argument's sake that Augustine and Aquinas and Gregory the Great and all the rest were right on this issue. Well, then you have somebody 2,000 years ago knowing what we're doing today. Isn't that just the foreknowledge and freedom problem again? And aren't you stripped of at least one valuable tool you had previously? Because previously you could have said, while God knows, God doesn't foreknow, strictly speaking, because to foreknow is to know beforehand. And if you have an outside of time God didn't know anything before or after, because such temporal relations don't hold for anything outside of time. Just like, if there's an Archangel Michael and he's not in space anywhere, he's not to my left and he's not to my right and he's not exactly right here either. So aren't you taking away one valuable tool and not being able to say anymore for the foreknowledge and freedom problem that the knower is totally outside of time, because Christ's human intellect was 2,000 years ago. Okay, so I think you're totally right. That's a good place to push on it. And I think it's true. You need a different sort of response for Christ's human intellect, because as you say, it's outside of time. As you say, it's inside of time, unlike the divine intellect. What to say? I like a sort of move here that Trenton Merricks will make in some places, and I think Kevin Timpey makes it in some places. And the idea is this: look at your or my knowledge. Your or my knowledge depends on how the world is. That's the direction of fit. So it's because the world is thus and such, because things happen this particular way, that what I believe is true about it. The world sets the truth value of the propositions, not the other way. Now, Christ's human knowledge it's just zapped in. It's infused knowledge, like Trinity in the Matrix can get, in the movie The Matrix, Trinity can get knowledge of how to fly a helicopter zapped into her brain. Well, so Christ can get the stuff zapped into his brain too. But it's still knowledge just like your knowledge. The cause is different. It's God zapping. But the thing is the same sort of thing as your knowledge. And we know your knowledge depends on how the world is. That's what sets the truth value of your knowledge. That's what makes it true. So I think all this to say the following: you don't get a problem of foreknowledge and freedom there, because though Christ in his human intellect knows the future things, those future things are true not because he knows it, but the other way. He knows it because they're true. It's because of their being the way that they are that his knowledge is the way that it is. And so you don't get the line of dependence going from what's known 2,000 years ago to right now. You get the line of dependence going from what's happening right now to God's infusion into Christ's human intellect of the stuff. That's the idea that I argue for in the book.
That's really, really good. Dr. Pawl, thank you so much for your time, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here with you guys. It's been really fun. You guys are doing good work.